pressures to conform and practice medicine the way you were taught, which is really disease care. It's not health care. I ran like food sensitivity tests on one was a lady with migraines. So she was in a dark room with a pillow over her head 5 days a week. I did a couple tests on her, and sure enough, got her off some foods, and her migraines went away. That's because the foods she was eating that we identified as inflammatory, for her, that was a miracle. She called me 2 weeks later and said, I haven't had a migraine in 2 weeks. And what she said was funny. She goes, I've only had normal headaches. See, it was a miracle for her to have a normal headache and just be able to take a couple of aspirin. It takes time to heal. And you can do it yourself. The body has an innate intelligence. You don't have to teach any cells what their job is. They know what to do. So you just have to properly nurture through its diet, rest, exercise, stress reduction, supplementation. And people are taking control and getting better results.
My name is Dr. Roberto Tostado. I'm a rebel doctor in regenerative medicine. I left traditional medicine over 25 years ago to help people transform their lives and not maintain their disease on drugs. Today, our guest is Reed Davis. He's a board-certified holistic health practitioner, as well as a certified nutritional therapist and coach who has certified thousands of people in nutrition, and founder of FDN, which is his functional diagnostic nutrition company, expert in functional lab testing, and of course, wellness lifestyle medicine. Well, we have a lot in common, Reed, and thank you so much for being on the show.
My pleasure to be here with you, Dr. Tostado.
Yeah. I appreciate this because I like aligning with people that I feel we can make more of an impact in people's lives versus just managing them on drugs and keeping them sick their whole life, and then not being aware that there's these options. So let me know, first off, how you became who you are today. And it's a big question, but you can give me the long and short. There's no rush.
Okay. Yeah, I can give you the quick 3-minute tour of FDN, Functional Diagnostic Nutrition, developed after about 10 years of working in a clinic. And if I go back just prior to that, I was actually in environmental law, conservation, saving the whole planet, air, birds, water, trees, bees. And I got very discouraged looking at the damage being done to the flora and fauna of the world. And I started to worry about people. I started to wonder, at least, what about people, including me? And even though I felt very healthy at the time, I didn't want anything to sneak up on me. And it was about 1999. A good friend of mine's dad died, and his family around said, well, he was perfectly healthy. I mean, this man just dropped dead. And I knew something was wrong with that story. I said, well, he couldn't have been perfectly healthy. No one drops dead if they're perfectly healthy. And around the same time, Roberto, my teenage son was a high school athlete, and I was taking him into this chiropractic wellness center, acupuncture, and different things they had at this wellness center. And he got 7 varsity letters in 4 different sports. So he was a real superstar. But I got a new career out of that, because after listening to these alternative doctors talk about how the body works and the innate intelligence of the body and nurturing that and their basic philosophy, I decided I want to work here. And I talked myself into a job. And within a very short period of time, I was running the whole office, and I was having a good time doing it. Now, I had made a lot of money in the environmental law field, but I knew nothing about this field. I had a lot to learn, but I had nothing to unlearn, as I like to say. I was really hired to run the office, to help them do some marketing and exposure. But the owner asked me if I'd like to attend some nutrition classes with her. And she said that I could go along as she got her diplomat in nutrition. I could go along and work on patients in between classes. Now, I thought that was just a remarkable, unheard of opportunity for someone who wasn't in the medical field. And so I jumped on it, and I fell in love with working with people face to face. So I would go to classes, go back and interview the people coming in the office and try to help them. Again, had a lot to learn. It's learning on the job. But what I noticed right away, and you'll understand this, and your audience will totally understand this. Almost everybody coming in that office had already been to 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 different practitioners, and they weren't well yet. And me coming from uh, a field of advocacy for the planet and for birds and trees and bees, I was advocating now for people. And I thought that was a total ripoff. I said, what do you mean? You've seen 6 doctors or practitioners of some kind, and you're not better yet? That must be a ripoff. No, I'd never been to a doctor for anything except for some sports injuries, a couple motorcycle accidents, and some dental work. So I didn't know what the medical system was like. And it was just upset me. And one day I happened to be out riding my motorcycle, thinking about these people back at the office. I was taking my classes. I was working there, running things. And I thought, I'm going to be the last guy they need to see. I don't know how, but I'm going to be the last person that these patients in Southern California at a nice office there, I'll help them. And so with that in mind, at the same time, I was exposed to this alternative lab work. So, matter of fact, 20 minutes from the office was a company called BioHealth Diagnostics and Dr. Bill Timmons. He's gone now, but he was really well known then for these alternative saliva testing, urine testing, stool testing, alternative testing, which only looked for the underlying causes and conditions. Perfect for me because I wasn't a doctor. I couldn't give a diagnosis. You can't do that. And no one coming in the office wanted another diagnosis. They wanted to know, well, what's really wrong? What's wrong? And they were tired of diagnosis. So I set about the next 10 years, running thousands of labs on thousands of people. And I got to learn a few things doing that. I had good coaching, but I made my own observations about who got better and who didn't. It'd be no surprise to you or anyone listening that the people who worked closest to the underlying causal factors, causal conditions, we're always looking upstream, what's out of balance, what's really dysfunctional, that may not even be apparently connected to the symptoms. The symptoms are way downstream. That's what people come in for, pain or something about the way they look or feel. They don't like it. But man, those causal factors were way upstream. And so I discovered a few patterns and things that eventually, after 10 years, I started teaching others how to do the methodology I developed. We called it FDN. I did. Now I'm kind of stuck with it. I'm not sure it's the best name in the world, but and I'll just finish this part because when I taught my first class, I didn't think anything would come of it. I just was kind of pushed in that direction. The only reason I developed the methodology and the systems that we use was for our clinic and for my own practice. That's why I studied hard and worked hard, did so much lab work. I was told by one lab director, he asked, "Who are you?" He called me one day. "Who are you?" "I don't know, Reed." He says, no. He goes, "You run more labs than the next busiest 5 doctors we know combined."
Incredible.
So whatever you're doing, you need to be teaching it. And so it took me 6 months. I I put a little class together, about 20 people in a hotel room downtown San Diego. And those people would not go away. And once they went to the class, a 2 day class, that's all it was. Now it's a 10-month school where I'm really teaching it the right way. But so I'll just say those people wouldn't go away. The alumni developed, and it was international. I had people from England and Canada and all over the United States, even though there was only 20 in that group. They just loved it. And I've never looked back. I've been teaching ever since and growing and, um, spreading the love around the world.
And I'm curious, Reed, so who were these people at this initial class of 20 people? Did they have, medical backgrounds, health backgrounds, or who was interested in
They
learning
were
this?
all they were all nutritionists or sort of alternative type practitioners. Some were maybe licensed, a couple nurses, maybe one chiropractor, but they were just like me, kind of lay practitioners. Very much wanted to learn about the lab work, and I was very experienced in it. I knew all the anatomy, the physiology, the biochemistry behind it, and so that's what I taught. But I taught my system, so it's I could go over that, but it's a very clear cut, step by step method of looking at these underlying causes and conditions and avoiding diagnosis. Just figure out what's really wrong. And the doctors at that clinic where I worked for a decade laughed at me. They laughed, hey, we can diagnose, we can write prescriptions. Reed, you're going to have to figure out what's really wrong and then teach them how to fix it because you can't treat either. You can't diagnose and you can't treat. So I had to come up with all the lifestyle and causal factors that were involved and codify that too and put it into a system. So it's really quite, I had a lot of fun doing it. And now that I've been teaching, we've done very well with it and we're going to keep doing it.
Yeah, and this is where you and I are completely aligned, where when I realized that the medical system that I studied for, well, eventually I came to think that MD means managed disease or more drugs, and definitely
Yeah.
not root cause. Yeah, definitely not root cause. And so when people come to my clinic, um, it's a different language, but I do tell them, look, it's about getting you off medication, not keeping you on medication. Because I remember years ago, a young woman, like 40-ish, came to me with a massive bag full of medication and threw it on my desk. And she's like, this is what's saving my life. I said, no, that's what's keeping you sick. And,
Yeah.
our mindset is just so warped as a society. What we've been indoctrinated with, that you're sick, go see your doctor, get your bag of pills, and it's going to be an ongoing conveyor belt of medication, like what you were saying, Reed. Too many specialists, and all these specialists are going to give you more drugs, more opinions, more studies, but keep you on this conveyor belt of chronic disease. So here, like with you and root cause, it's about getting into the physiology, into the function, so that we are treating the organism, the whole person, to extract what's actually going on through lab testing, which I want to talk to you at length right now,
Sure.
so that people understand that we first need a blueprint, a physiologic blueprint as to what's really going on in their body, so we could address everything without being in the dark. And the problem, one of the major problems I see in traditional medicine, is that the lab testing is so limited, so generic, that I get so many patients coming in saying, oh, wow, my doctor says I'm fine. And that's a word I
Yeah.
can't say, fine. I said, no, you're not fine until we dig deeper. And typically when we dig deeper, they're far from fine. so,
Yes.
um, so yeah, so I like to make people not fine, not okay, but feel fantastic at whatever age. So going back to what you were saying, Reed, in terms of the testing, yeah, just talk to me about, and our audience, about the types of tests that you found to be the most productive, and your approach, your methodology.
So yeah, it's kind of a neat story. was introduced to saliva testing, urine testing, stool testing, it wasn't just the common everyday CBC, chem panel, the blood work. Matter of fact, to your point, the people coming in had already had the blood work done. And often I heard, my doctor says there's nothing wrong with me. My doctor says my blood work's perfectly normal. But they knew that there was something wrong. They're not feeling like they used to feel. They feel horrible sometimes. And yet nothing else shows up on the blood work. So I just was lucky. I was truly blessed to be introduced to these doctors who were doing the saliva testing of hormones, for instance. Now, that's just one, and I have a whole sort of series of tests, and it came from being very, I'll say, aggressive. I went out in the public, and I brought people into that office. At first, that was my job, was to help market. And I got really good at that. Screenings, health screenings, lectures, just going out and introducing a different approach, even as I was only just developing it. And so I got to run a lot of labs. And I figured out real quickly that if someone's initial complaints were, let's say, hormonal, hot flashes, night sweats, and, perimenopause and postmenopause and all these things. So I'd run the saliva testing for hormones and we'd find imbalances. And maybe you do a little therapy on that. There's obviously lifestyle is important, but some supplements and things, even sometimes, matter of fact, that's about back then when bioidentical hormones were first introduced or became more popular, as the conventional hormones turned out to be very dangerous for
Right.
people. There was a study done in 2001. I could tell you all the story, but the main point was that some women got a lot better. I feel fantastic now. Others, not so much. So then I figured out that, well, they have other issues. So they've got immune system problems, digestive problems, and detoxification problems. So again, 10 years is a long time and thousands of labs, and I got to experiment. These were out of pocket. These were patients who were willing to spend the money. We were not working within the insurance model at all. And so again, I just started to recognize patterns. And the pattern I recognized was, I call it the hidden, HIDDEN. So hidden: hormone, immune, digestion, detoxification, energy production, and nervous system balance, the autonomic, sympathetic, and those 6 areas, and you can run the testing, you can get the data on all of that. So way upstream, you're looking at this whole constellation of healing opportunities. That's the key phrase: healing opportunities. These are not diagnoses. This is what we found that's wrong with you, Mrs. Smith, if you will. And the hormones wasn't just the sex hormones. We're looking at the catabolic and anabolic. So cortisol and DHEA. I ran thousands of those and found out people under stress, all kinds of stress. Sometimes they didn't even know how stressed out they were. They're walking around in pain. They're walking around with mental, emotional problems. They're walking around with chemical problems. Like, remember, I came from the environmental field, so I know what they're subjecting themselves to. So all these different kinds of stress equal catabolic, anabolic imbalance. Your body's breaking down. You're getting old before your time. So that they identified with. Now, the next thing to go as the dominoes fall would be the sex hormones. And those are easy to identify. Low estrogen, you're having hot flashes and night sweats, and your periods are skipping or you're not having them anymore. Also, a lot of infertility in the younger women. So you're catabolic, anabolic, your body's breaking down because of all these stressors. Now your sex hormones are out. You're symptomatic from that. The next domino to fall is the immune system, because secretory IgA is most of the immune system. And with high cortisol and stress, your SIG-A, your secretory IgA, will go down. Well, now what? Dysbiosis. So now you're not breaking down and absorbing nutrients because you have to have the right microbiome to digest food and break down proteins into their amino acids. And so now you've got now you're catabolic, anabolic, you're aging before your time, your body's breaking down, you got sex hormone problems, and now you've got more or less an immune system problem because you're dysbiotic. Well, when you're dysbiotic, that's just good and bad flora. But guess what happens? Well, bigger, badder bugs. That's my medical term for it. Bigger, badder bugs.
I like that.
Come along. And so now you can get infestations and overgrowth and things. And it just goes down from there. You end up with the hyperpermeability or leaky gut. Now what? You've got liver congestion because you've got immune complexes and unwanted bionts floating through the hepatic portal system. So now you've got hormone, immune, digestion, detoxification problems. And eventually it goes very systemic, as you know. You've got mitochondrial energy production issues. You've got inflammation all over the place. And this can manifest in ways that when people show up, one, it might be headaches. They got migraines. Another one might have asthma. Another one might have just joint pain. And there was a term back then, I don't hear it as much anymore, but everybody had fibromyalgia.
Right.
Coming in. They came in and it's like, my doctor says I have fibromyalgia. And they clung to this diagnosis with the medication and the different, I had to pull that apart into, well, yes, you have fibromyalgia, because they were in a lot of pain as well with the inflammation. But I just can't tell you how many times, if they would invest in the laboratory work, that we could sort it out. I call it resolving metabolic chaos, Roberto. So that's a term that I sort of coined. And I'll pause for a minute with, there's never one root cause. So my associates were looking for root causes. We all do. That's a good thing. But I found that there's hardly ever just one, and so these causal factors way upstream, not only were they sometimes 5, 6, 7, 8 different things, but they're having an effect on each other that you can't even measure. There's not enough labs. And I'm a guy that teaches lab work. I know a few things about labs. There isn't enough labs to figure it all out. So you need to have a point of view that looks at multiple causal factors and gives people things to do to start pulling it apart and resolving each issue. You could start with their main complaints and go from there. But it's quite an interesting system that just grew. It just, I didn't know, but I've had so many miraculous cases. I can tell you about a few of them or a couple. Just almost miracles occur by just getting it right. And that encouraged me to keep going. And of course, you know how this work can be so rewarding when you get some good results. You feel like a real genius.
No, I love everything you're talking about, because these are the things that I always felt at a loss when I was in traditional medicine. And I was always telling my wife that, I thought after medical school you knew everything. And I said, I basically know nothing, because I felt like it's just a glorified drug pusher. And, I grew up in a rough area in Los Angeles, so I just felt like the corner drug pusher, except I had a white coat and a license. So it was legalized. And This is the concept I want people in the audience to understand. With all the work you've been doing, Reed, instilling this knowledge and wisdom into people so that they understand there are issues, environmental, food-based, how a person thinks, all these factors, emotional, that affect our health. And, it's interesting because you said people had to pay to get these labs done. And I'm always telling my patients, because the number one question I'm sure you got and I always get is this covered by insurance? Is this covered by insurance? And I would say no, because wellness or holistic or integrative medicine is not recognized by insurances. So you either copay for your disease and keep copaying the rest of your life or invest in your health. And I'm sure once you gave people that critical knowledge and understanding, and they thought, oh my God, here I thought I was fine because my doctor said I was, or all my ologists said I was, and yet here you're delineating all the issues that they have. So I do want our audience to hear about some of these, a couple of these miracle cases.
Oh, well, I tell some of these over and over because they were so impactful. One was a lady who came in. She was coming in for chiropractic care because she had hurt her neck and back, and on about her fourth or fifth visit, she wasn't a client of mine yet. She was with another doctor that I worked with, and I noticed she was feeling sad. I just could tell her head was down. I said, "Hey, what's going on?" You know me, I'm the cheery guy, and so I'm the cheerleader there. And hey, what's going on? Uh, she goes, "Oh, Reed, it's just so distressing. I'm so frustrated with this weight." And she complained about her 40 pounds overweight. And, I wanted to interject, well, hey, what are we going to do about that? But she wanted to get her story out this day. And I let her talk. And much as I wanted to butt in, she said that this weight was very frustrating. And the reason she was 40 pounds overweight was from medication for the hives. She was on steroids. And so she's on this medication for the hives. And it caused her to gain a lot of weight over 2 years. And, again, I wanted to jump in and give her some ideas. But she said, she had just been to the physician who has her on this medication very recently, a couple of days. And she complained to him how frustrating the weight was from the medication, from the hives, medication for the hives. And according to her, he said, kind of, lady, you can be fat or you can have the hives. Take your pick.
Wow.
And wait, it gets better. She says, and I told him, well, that's very depressing, doctor. And he said, well, I'll be happy to write your prescription for antidepressants.
There you go.
And so, and the whole time she's staring at the floor and, and I wanted to jump. Finally, I got my chance and I said, well, first name, did you ever try to find out why you get the hives? And I saw the light bulb go on and her head snapped around so hard looking at me, finally lifted her head. She turned her head so hard I thought she wouldn't need her chiropractic adjustment that day. Just like, what? Sure enough, I sent her home with a couple test kits. I said, I don't know. I mean, there's no guarantees with this, but maybe we can find something. We got her test results back and gave her report, got her changing some foods and things. And within 9 days, Doc, she told me within 9 days, she called her doctor and said, I'm not taking this medication anymore because I found out why I get the hives. Now, to you and me and anyone listening, it would just seem logical and normal. And well, of course, 25 years ago, it wasn't like that. And I think even today, there's a lot of that going on of just managing the symptoms, but creating worse problems. And so within another couple of weeks, she was working out to a sweat and taking hot showers. She told me, I said, what's the big deal with that? She goes, Reed, even on the medication, hot showers and perspiring would get the hives. So this completely changed. And now she's losing weight. So it completely changed her life and changed mine because I knew I was onto something with the lab work that was alternative, that insurance didn't pay for that, any of that lab work. And so she was just happy and I was happy, and I still get chills when I think of it. And there's so many other stories just like it, but I'm sure you've experienced the same thing, right?
Oh yeah, and it's interesting, right? When you take the source away of that particular issue, people start feeling so much better. And, you know, uh, that you're talking about the weight issue, and brings to mind this Duke University statistic that came out a couple years ago that only 90, or I should say 90% of this country has a metabolic issue. Hence, only 10% of people are healthy. I mean, that's astounding, but it isn't, because you see it all around us. You see a lot of weight issues. You see a lot of people with prediabetes or diabetes at kids' ages. We can't even use the word adult onset diabetes anymore, because you just see it all in 10, 12-year-olds. And it's astounding what you see in this country. And so, yeah, a lot of people have come and they say, well, I've been on this diet and that diet, and I lose weight, but then I gain it back. And obviously now we have this whole Ozempic craze where people are losing both muscle weight and fat weight, but they're not learning how to eat. They're not taught nutrition. So I'm suspecting we're going to develop this pandemic of chronic obesity, because people aren't going to be able to actually lose their weight. Their metabolism is going to be destroyed. And so, yeah, it's a point where, going to what you were saying, where I have patients here who have reversed their type 2 diabetes, going through nutrition, detoxification after doing more thorough blood testing, understanding their metabolism, their toxicity levels, their hormonal levels, which I want to talk to you more about. And once I get them metabolically balanced and detoxified, and they understand what nutrition is, and I always tell them, look, it's not about being a vegan or being ketogenic or paleolithic. I said, that's a personal choice. What I tell them is the whole point is to start introducing real food into your day-to-day eating, which is kind of a foreign concept. I don't know, Reed, what you think, but I believe anyone born 1980 and forward was brought up with processed foods 100%. Hence, we're seeing this pandemic of globesity, as I call it, and
Yeah.
all these processed foods that have been poisoning us. So when you take people away from the source, just like the source of our hives, the source of our pandemic of obesity, people start understanding I could eat these great foods and proteins and healthy fats and legumes and fruit, whatever the case might be, on a regular basis. And we say, well, bingo, that's the point. And then they ask, well, what do I tell my doctor? Because I'm not taking my diabetic meds anymore. They're actually afraid to tell their doctor that they're healthy, which I find hilarious.
Yeah.
So,
That is very interesting. And I feel where you're coming from a lot. I'm really appreciative of you stepping outside the box. It takes a lot of um, uh, bravery. You have to be brave to do that, because the pressures to conform and practice medicine the way you were taught, which is really disease care, it's not health care, and you've done amazing work. But I wanted to add something to the thought process here that's been very helpful for me, if I can, because I ran those same tests on a lot of people, thousands, but I didn't get the same results with every person. And the reason is, this is where I get this metabolic chaos phrase, because I ran like food sensitivity tests on one was a lady with migraines. So she was in a dark room with a pillow over her head 5 days a week. She couldn't keep a job. She didn't even have a job. And but I did a couple tests on her. One was a food sensitivity test, and sure enough, got her off some foods, and her migraines went away. That's because the foods she was eating that we identified as inflammatory, I use what's called a mediator release test. It's not an IgG test. It's not mediated by immunoglobulins. It's a different kind of test. So for her, that was a miracle. She called me 2 weeks later and said, I haven't had a migraine in 2 weeks. And what she said was funny. She goes, I've only had normal headaches. And, of course, I said, there's no such thing as a normal headache, but I'm happy that you're not having the migraines. She was a miracle for her to have a normal headache and just be able to take a couple of aspirin. Now that's where some people start, like they know that's not normal. But for her, that was a big improvement. And I continued to do a little work with her. But those foods that we identified were triggers for her and her migraines. But you take another person with migraines, a food sensitivity test, if foods aren't contributing to it, and I call it contributing to the metabolic chaos, then you're not going to get the same results. So you have to have other tests and other ways of looking at what is triggering and part of this idea of metabolic chaos. Remember, these causal factors are affecting each other too. In a recent study from the University of San Diego, California, University of California, San Diego, determined that the original root cause doesn't even have to be there anymore. It could be long gone, but the downward spiral, the metabolic issues, to your point, the metabolic dysfunction, the sort of rerouting or damage to the pathways and the enzymes, even the genes can be affected. And so it's so individualized that you need a way of thinking about it. And I don't want to get too convoluted, but I just had some miracles occur and sometimes not, which is what made me keep working and keep more tests and more trying to figure it out, trying to help every person. And you'd be amazed at how well people can get if you can identify enough of those contributors to metabolic chaos. Again, there's a constellation of healing opportunities. So when I found out, when I ran the hormone, immune, digestion, detoxification, energy production, nervous system, and by the way, oxidative stress, and we always do food sensitivity testing. We also always do some microbiome testing. Now, it seems like a lot, but when you use any other method that I've seen, you can't get as good of results. So if you think you're going to guess which test, you're so smart. And a lot of physicians, even in functional medicine, they're using what I call the sounds like method. So if it sounds like thyroid, what do? Thyroid has a very reliable cluster of symptoms. You know what they are. So they come in and they've got 6 or 8 of those symptoms. Oh, it sounds like thyroid. Run a thyroid test. Yep, sure enough, you have low thyroid. I always say, well, don't hurt your wrist patting yourself on the back. Because sure, you could give them some thyroid medication. In my view, that's only treating the paper. You say, oh, look, yep, low thyroid. I knew it. And you bring that thyroid level back. You haven't really done a thing other than relieve some symptoms by treating the paper, in my opinion. So, our view is always go even more upstream, look at multiple causal factors, and then not use medication. And I'll give you a brief backstory. Remember, the doctors laughed at me because I couldn't diagnose, I couldn't write prescriptions. And they said, you're going to have to not only figure out what's wrong with people, but teach them how to fix it themselves. And so this is a long time ago, a couple of decades. And I started realizing these patients were coming in the office regularly for chiropractic, for acupuncture. We had different modalities. We had a podiatrist, we had an osteopath. And so they're coming in regular. Like that lady I just told you about, she was in on her 6th or so visit before I even talked to her one-on-one like that. And I started realizing and telling the patients, you're coming in the office, that's wonderful, but what are you doing at home? So I started really analyzing their lifestyle. And I kind of came up with this HIDDEN and other stuff to test for these healing opportunities. I said, you got to go home and you have to eat right. You have to go to bed on time and you have to exercise. You have to reduce stress in every way that possible. And supplements can be very helpful. And so I call that DRESS. So you have hidden investigation, HIDDEN, and then diet, rest, exercise, stress reduction, supplementation. So we have a five-fingered approach to how that person can take control of their health as long as there's time to heal. That's the one caveat. Difference between us and a medical doctor is the observations we make, HIDDEN, and so on. It takes time to heal, and you can do it yourself. And you can do it yourself. In fact, the body has an innate intelligence. You don't have to teach any cells what their job is. They know what to do. So you just have to properly nurture through, again, DRESS, dress for health success. I trademarked it because it works so well. And so it's diet, rest, exercise, stress reduction, supplementation. And people are taking control and getting better results than just, oh, it sounds like thyroid, or it sounds like a parasite, or sounds like you name something. And running that one or two tests, yep, again, patting ourselves on the back and treating the paper, they don't get the same results.
Right.
And so it's a lot to teach a person, but that's what we're supposed to do, I think, is run the labs, teach them, here's why you feel so lousy. It's all of these things. And here's what you can do. And start tomorrow, start today, changing your life. So it's epigenetic medicine is what it is. And I know you're doing it. I'm just saying it in my own way.
No. And, you raise a very important point here, and that's about accountability. Because, in the traditional medical system, patients are disempowered. You listen to me, I'm going to give you your diagnosis, I'm going to give you your drugs, I'm going to tell you what to take and monitor your blood test for that particular drug or reaction to the drug every 3 to 6 months, and get out of here, and I'll see you next time. You have questions? No, I don't want to hear them. I'll see you next time. That's essentially the whole routine. And the thing of it is that what people have to understand when they see you read or they come to my clinic is that I tell them first and foremost, I'm here to empower you, but you need to take accountability for your health. I used to have this other podcast show years ago, and on every episode, I would say health begins on the kitchen table, not the doctor's office. And the problem is that, and I'm sure you're aware of this, Reed, but in medical schools here in the States, we're not taught nutrition. And, and I went to a pretty good school. And if I recall correctly, I think there was one 45-minute lecture from a poor nutritionist where probably 20 students showed up, half were asleep. I think I was the only one who was awake. And I was the only time I enjoyed my medical school experience is that one 45-minute lecture. But doctors otherwise are severely ignorant and in the dark when it comes to the understanding of food, nutrition, and how it affects us. And I know that's one of the major components in all the dysbiosis you were referring to, that again, it's like we have this whole epidemic. And, my joke is I tell people if you feel like shit, it's because you're full of shit. And we're seeing so many people that are essentially constantly constipated. And I'm sure you see a lot of this, Reed, that the digestive systems are just so messed up. And it's because of all this, knowingly or unknowingly, all this chemical that they're putting in their body, or, wheat and corn that's been destroyed in the soils. And once they go through a detoxification process, they're like, hey, all my digestive systems disappeared. Why is that? I said, because you're finally putting real food in your body. But anyway, so I want
I understand. You're doing amazing work. I'm telling you, because, and you're on the cutting edge right now, right where we need to be, teaching people to take that responsibility. Matter of fact, you remember I said that when I taught my first class, after 10 years of being in the office, they wouldn't go away. They just wanted to know more and more. And so it became an alumni, which we're all over the world. I've trained 5,000 people, have about 1,200 dues-paying members of the professional group. So we have a professional group. And what I also had to teach them that I learned in the office was how to properly onboard a patient or client, if you call them clients. And that means really, I don't like to say getting in their heads, but having them really commit to the program. You have to know exactly what they want to accomplish. It has to be reasonable. What's your main complaint? That's easy. How often does it bother you? How long has that been going on? What have you tried so far that obviously hasn't worked? What is this going to mean to you if you get rid of it? And you hear the most amazing, simple explanations. Some people just want to go dancing again or just want to have a better looking body. You hear that, but it could be something simple. Play with my children again. And so you get the motivating factors. That person might commit. You still have to ask them other questions like, well, what would stand in your way of finishing a program? Because remember, this is a program. This isn't here, take this, come back in 3 months, we'll check your levels.
Right.
That's treating the paper. This is, we're going to explain what's wrong with you. We're going to give you some things that if you do them, then you will be dancing again. You will be playing with your kids. You got to really attach it to something meaningful and purposeful, and also assess what's going to stand in their way of completing the program. So it's not just come back in 3 months. It's let's do this for 3 months. And you can actually help guide and shape that person's correct course as you go, because there's a lot of moving parts. And so I always ask what would stand in your way of completing a minimum of a 90-day lifestyle program, minimum 90 days. And of course, you can redo it. That's a nice bite-sized piece. We can all live with that.
Sure.
And you can get a commitment on that. And you'd be amazed. People would say, when I got to that question, so I know what's their main complaint, how often it bothers them, what they've tried so far, what would it mean to them if they get rid of it, what will it mean if they don't get rid of it, and then they're going to let something like, what would stop you from finishing a program? I had one lady say, just don't make me quit eating ice cream before bed, because I'm not going to do that. So I had to learn. I mean it. She was so nervous. She came in for her report of findings with her husband, and she was just like this shaking. And found out, she goes, I just don't want to have to quit eating ice cream before bed. And so she could not do the program. That's how I learned to ask that question. Because, if you don't get to the resistance factors, well, I would call them blocking factors, or, just obstacles to healing.
Right.
And it could be something like addictions are really huge. So you might have to get that out of the way. Also money, they've got to invest. That's a problem for some people, or lack of support. If someone says, well, my spouse thinks this is all bullshit and it's a big waste of money, and they bring home pizza and beer every night, that's an obstacle. That's going to really, so I might not take on a person who can't get past that question of what would, at least I need to know ahead of time. I might still take you on as a client. I need to know ahead of time if money or lack of support or some addiction is going to get in the way. So I didn't just have to teach the anatomy, physiology, the biochemistry of the lab work, clinical correlation skills, and then developing the protocols, DRESS, all customized, all completely individualized, but the onboarding and the management of the program, because it's not go do this for 3 months and come back. You're going to be doing some kind of coaching or ongoing support from the office, or now I work from home, which is a beautiful thing. But and then of course managing their commitment, getting that commitment way up there, and reasonable expectations. So all these things have to be sorted out on top of what the hell's wrong with you.
Yeah, no. I mean, exactly right, because that's a point that you and I are completely on in terms of, I always ask my patient after going through the whole explanation of their lab work and their concerns. And then I ask them, this is the most important question before we go any further. Why do you want to be healthy? Again, that emotional component you were talking about. And do you want to be healthy? And they look at me like it's a silly question. I said, no, it isn't. I said, most people aren't healthy. So they're telling me they don't want to be healthy. So, and like you, I had a patient that was going to go through our liver cleanse program. And she says, well, do I have to give up my martini every single night? And
Yeah.
I said, it would help. And I'm going to say, absolutely. She says, well, then I can't do this. And I said, okay, well, then you don't want to be healthy. I get it. So I said, come back to me when you want to be healthier. And, there's this
Yeah.
interesting quote you reminded me of where I think it was Hippocrates, old school guy, who said, in order to help heal someone, you have to ask that person, are they willing to give up the things that make them sick? And that's what it is.
Absolutely. So there's some habit forming, and you're really just going to replace bad habits with good ones. We don't even have to say bad. You can just say very, unproductive and
Sure.
things that aren't working for you. And you know that what you're doing now isn't working for you. You got to be able to take a look at that, and that requires self awareness. So now we're not even talking about healing and what to do. The what to do is actually pretty easy to figure out. It's getting people to do it, especially when they're bombarded, as you talked about a little bit, with the lies being told by commercial. Um, I call them the those that would have monopolies. So
Right.
there are those who would have monopolies on what we eat, drink, watch on TV, time we go to bed, everything. They'll monopolize our entire lives if we let them, the big evil they.
Right. Well, look, I've come out and said that, I used to work for the Pharmafia and I got out of it. So, yeah, the powers that be, and, the whole irony of the American Heart Association, American Cancer, American Diabetic, if you go into their websites, the food companies that sponsor these organizations are the foods that make you sick and would, lead you to these diseases. And so, and I think it's important that there's people like you, Reed, educating people. And I'm curious, do you get medical doctors that secretly sneak into your conferences and want to learn and absorb some of this stuff because they didn't get it in medical school?
Well, yeah, not so secret. I mean, there's people with good intentions who
Great.
realize what they're doing isn't working, so they're pretty open, and more today. But I could tell you, back in the day, it was hard to sell. I had a kid, no, a mom. I had a mom in the office, and she was doing pretty well. And she asked me if I work with kids. Do you work with children? I said, well, I coached football for 15 years, youth sports, and raised 4 kids. And yeah, I work with kids. Why? She goes, well, they're trying to send my son home from school if I won't put him on drugs. And the drug of choice back then was Ritalin
Mm,
for ADD and that.
right.
I said, what? She goes, yeah, the principal and the teacher want to put him on medication, Ritalin, or I can't send him back to school. They're about to tell me, they're about to kick him out. And I was joking. I said, well, do you think he has a Ritalin deficiency? And she didn't think it was funny. She got mad at me. She got mad and says, no, I don't want to put my son on medication, on drugs. And so I said, okay, so I don't know if I can help or not. We'll see what we can do. And by the way, I asked her too, was there a nurse at the school or a doctor working at? Nope, this was just a teacher and a principal of a 9-year-old boy, by the way. 9-year-old boy that they wanted to put on a class 2 narcotic. So, as you
Wow.
know, class 2 narcotics, it's the same class as cocaine.
Sure.
That's what Ritalin is and was. And I just couldn't fathom it myself. I said, I don't know if I could help or not. We ran some tests and got the results and changed the boy's lifestyle. And I could tell you exactly how. But within 3 weeks, Roberto, within 3 weeks, got a call from the principal. He said, this is a different kid. Tracked me down through the mom. This is a different kid. He's not jumping out of his chair. He's not poking the other kids. He's not outbursting inappropriately. He's actually paying attention and getting good grades in 3 weeks. And I'm all getting the fuzzy feeling great. Yeah, I'm such a hero. What a genius. Um, Much more humble than that, of course. But then he said, what'd you put him on? And that just kind of burst the bubble, what'd you put him on? And I thought, oh, he's looking for something magic in a bottle for the other kids, I had to disappoint him and say what we put him on was a better diet without all the shit. We put him on a regular bedtime schedule, more exercise, like 5 times the exercise that you give him at school. And that's what we put him on is this, a healthy activity level and diet and everything for a 9-year-old. And he didn't want to hear that, all that work and everything, just, he was looking for something above. But the point I'm making is that if you look and you keep this point of view that there's always somewhere to look, there's something. And then that mom took responsibility. I never met the young man. She never brought him in the office. I just taught the mom, here's what to do. This is what we're going to, and, you have to be strict. You got to be a good mom, and control everything. And it worked good. And more. So to your point, I got to tell you one more quick one. So on my football team, I had a mom come up to me during a practice, and she said, "Would the young man? He probably there was 11 years old at this time. So would this young man, if he didn't come to practice, could he still play in the game on Saturday?" What do you think I told him? No way. You're gonna skip practice and still play on Saturday. That's not going to happen. Why? Why does he have to miss practice? She goes, well, he's got asthma and he's embarrassed having his inhaler thing. And so I said, listen, we'll help you out, and had her come in the office again. Got the boy tested. Within just a couple weeks, he never had another asthma attack.
Amazing.
And went on. Now he was 11 or 12 at the time. He went on to be a very, very fine high school athlete, football player, and never had. And in matter of fact, the mom brought his siblings in, and even made her husband and herself get tested. They all wanted to do my work, and I used to see them at the gas station in town. It was a small town, and they still thank me like 10 years later, thanking me for what I did for their kids and stuff. So the work is amazing. But the reason I mention that is because I talked to a doctor, and I told him about the tests I was running and the results I was getting. And he was an asthma doctor, that was his specialty. He was on the board of all this and that. And he said, oh, that test is not approved. It's not an approved test. I said, well, it's approved by my clients and stuff. He didn't want to hear about it. So to your point, that's what made me think of those cases where, man, this was so alternative and not being done and not approved, and insurance won't pay for it, which is why he would never recommend it. Because if insurance wasn't going to pay for it, doctors have a hard time, recommending it. I don't think they're even allowed to, something like that.
No, that's the problem. A lot of physicians have their hands tied, and I don't want to give people the wrong impression. Medical doctors, it's not that we're bad people, it's the system that we're trained in. And it's
Yes.
very limiting, extremely limiting, and it keeps us ignorant. It's like the blind leading the blind. And I'm sure you get this read, but a lot of times I'll go through, this specific pathway of, okay, I'm going to get you from A to B, get you off your medication, and we're going to help with your toxicities, hormonal deficiencies, and nutritional issues. And I always laugh when I get this question. So what's the side effect? And everything I use is essentially plant-based. And I say, here's the side effect. I tell them, health. You're gonna be
Mm.
healthy. You're gonna be happy. I said, that's a pretty damn good side effect as far as I'm concerned. Yet, when I was at Kaiser, I could give them a prescription for whatever, and they'll say,
Mhm.
"Oh, I'm going to happily take this. I don't care about the side effects." And the one thing, Reed, that finally got me out of allopathic medicine was, ironically, I was still at Kaiser, and this is the year 2000, and I went to this alternative or complementary medicine conference by the American College of American Medicine, anti-aging medicine, and I felt like I was with my group of doctors because these were doctors who were thinking way outside the box. And I don't want to be part of traditional medicine anymore. I don't just want to prescribe drugs. So there's this one neurologist giving a lecture on the top 10 causes of death in this country. And after heart disease and strokes and cancer, number four was pharmaceuticals taken as prescribed. I'm not talking about overdosing. And that's when I had my epiphany. I said, no more. I don't want to be licensed to do this and just manage disease. I want to do something better. And that's what inspired me. And so, anyway, I just want to touch on that because I find it
Well,
so
that's
laughable.
fantastic. Well, let's give a nod too to that point that and you probably were at an A4M conference, something like that,
Yeah.
where they have
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I go every year to the one in Las Vegas. It's amazing. You can learn so much. These are cutting edge docs trying to spread the love, and a better way of looking at things. But I have to say that there's plenty of times when the most appropriate, safest, best pathway is to go see a doctor and get whatever it takes to uh, stop the downward spiral if it's a contracted thing. So if you have Ebola virus,
Sure.
you're not going to call one of my graduates or a nutritionist or something. If you're the victim of a drive-by shooting, you said you're
Sure.
from LA, and
Yeah.
so yeah, you have to stop the bleeding. So the way I put it is when the downward spiral, stress related chronic downward spiraling condition, when it's a protracted, then the observations that we make, all of my saliva, urine, blood, stool testing, those observations can be capitalized because there's time to heal. We did make this point earlier. But if it's really contracted, and you got to go get your butt to the emergency room or doctor and get on some medication and do some heroic attendant care or whatever is needed. So there really is something in both areas to be commended and to understand. When you hear me talking about lifestyle medicine, I'm not putting doctors down in any way. Matter of fact, doctors who are in that field and they kind of are doing what they have to do and what they've always done, they're hiring my grads who can come along and work with their patients on the protracted
Sure.
all the lifestyle things, and they're teaching each other, and so it's really kind of a neat thing. You might want to hire a couple of my grads here, Doc, and expand your business. They'll help
No,
you.
that's a great collaborative effort. And that makes a lot of sense. And it's true what you're saying. Because I always tell people, look, Western medicine excels in trauma, interventionist medicine. You're having a heart attack, you're having a stroke. Absolutely. Stop the bleeding. Give your insulin because your sugar is 1,000. But where the issue then is, it's in the ongoing care where that's where people like yourself and myself, now that I came to this side of the fence in terms of health and healing, where now it's not so much about keeping your medication, but preventing you from X, Y, and Z happening again. And we can do it through like your beautiful acronym, approaching health through hidden. Uh, there's an acronym I use that's more specific to hormones. I use the plant-based hormones. I call it goat to beast. And I tell people goat is not greatest of all time. It's actually the symptoms that men and women feel, particularly when they're hormonally imbalanced and focusing on testosterone, where they can feel grumpy or the mood issues or obesity or less muscle, sarcopenia, anxiety or depression and fatigue, being tired or sexual dysfunction, goats. It's funny, I gave this presentation in Mexico City and tried to translate it in Spanish, but it just didn't quite work out. I had to think of a different animal for my acronym. But the point is that when people become aware of this sort of medicine, and honestly, I hesitate to call it what you do or what I do alternative, because this is what should be the actual way of helping people live healthy lives, healthy, happy lives. And you said this much earlier in our talk where too many people are feeling old and they're too young. And it's interesting because that's an expression I use with my patients. I say, you're way too young to be old. Their biological age, and that's what people need to understand. Your birthday age, whatever, we're going to age every year, blow out another candle, but your biological age is what really matters. Are you younger regardless of your chronological age, or are you much older? And that's what we have to look at through this lab testing and see what's actually going on in their physiology, mitochondria, and so forth.
Yeah, so you'll prescribe medicine when it's appropriate, but then what we'd prefer to do is get that person to, and again, I repeat myself, live yourself out of the problems you've lived yourself into. Live
Right.
yourself out of what you lived yourself into, because epigenetics are, which is, the effect that the world around us and the universe has on us. It has an effect, and it can be very negative, as I found out decades ago in the environmental law and conservation field. There's some horrible stuff out there, and they're putting it in our food and water and air, and it's actually cleaned up a lot. You'd be surprised what I just call them a bunch of old hippie lawyers sued the government and sued big companies, and we got the rivers cleaned up, and a lot of it, I was on the Great Lakes, for instance, and Lake Erie was dead. It was considered to be a dead lake, and it's now one of the fishing capitals of North America because they stopped the pollution. And so there's the remnants, and now instead of it being the rivers catching on fire, they still got it in our food with all the stuff. So we have a lot of work yet to do, Roberto.
Oh no,
When
absolutely. And I was going to ask you, Reed, what do you tell your patients? Because I get this question, who says to you, "Yeah, I do want to be healthy. I want to eat healthier. I want to lose weight. I want to have more energy, less pain." And then they tell you, "But being healthy is expensive." What's your typical response?
I'll say, well, if you think being healthy is expensive, try being sick, because that's what's expensive. You can't work, you're not productive, you're unhappy. And so I don't think you can be happy without being healthy. Real joy comes from other than your spiritual health, comes from a healthy body and mind. And so it's worth the investment. And the older you get, the more you start to realize.
Yeah.
There's an old joke. The guy says, "Yeah, um, until I was about 40, I spent half my money on weed, women, and wine. The rest I wasted." Now, I don't know if that's appropriate for this podcast, but I had to say it.
Why
And
not?
so,
Sure.
so we did a lot of stuff to our bodies, man, that adds up and it takes its toll. And some of it doesn't manifest until you're older. I'm 72 years old,
Wow.
and
Great.
I don't feel it, and most people say I don't act it. That's for sure. But my best investment right now is my health. And it's the same with the people around me. I live in an area with older people. I'm not retired, but a lot of them are. And man, you can start to see them go downhill when they don't invest in their bodies and their health and do healthy, fun stuff. It's really remarkable. If they're just sitting back, eating crap and popping pills, they I could tell you they're not happy.
No, you can't fake happy. You are or you aren't. It's so true what you're saying, Reed, because I gave this one guy this analogy after going through his blood work, and he was a walking time bomb. Unfortunately, I see a lot of this scenario, and I asked him, how much is a funeral? And he's like, they're expensive. I said, yeah, they are. Funerals are very expensive. And I said, for what I'm proposing for your health costs probably 25% of a funeral to extend your life probably 20 or 30 years of a quality life. You're welcome.
Yeah.
I think he got it.
Yeah, that's a good one. So another thing I might say, when the subject of money and investment comes up, I will compare, let's say, a 90-day program with one of my practitioners to a vacation for your family for a week at a nice place. It's going to cost you some money. It's more than a weekend, but not as much as 2 weeks, at a resort or something. So, if you're not willing to invest that kind of money, then we really can't work together. Unfortunately, you have to pay for the labs, and I have my own professional fees,
Sure.
and they're well earned. And so I know what I have to charge to set the example. I live a pretty good lifestyle. Well, that's the example that you set. People don't want to get their advice from someone who's living in a van down by the river. So you got to be able to afford organic food. Organic food, you go into the farmer's market and having a personal trainer or Pilates instructor and these different things, requires the mentality of investment, the best investment you can make. So some people can't get past that until they get really sick. And then all of a sudden, now they don't have any choice, and that's unfortunate. So what are we in the business of? Education.
Absolutely.
My entire business is education. It's what I do. And isn't that where the term doctor came from? Something like that?
Yes. At least
Doctor.
originally. Yeah. Originally.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Docere is Latin for teach, I think. Something along those lines.
and what's unfortunate, we've again in the medical field we've chosen pills over plants, as I like to say. And I'm not vegetarian, but my point is just to eat wholesome foods. And there's a lot of navigation to go through. I understand because issues with gluten, issues with the Pacific Ocean. I mean, you lived in San Diego most of your life, mercury and radiation. So, but the whole point is I nonetheless try to keep it simple so that people don't feel it's so daunting to eat healthier. And to understand it really is about, it's more about elimination and then integration of things that they enjoy that are healthier. And I always tell people that the two healthiest cultures in the world are the Japanese in Japan and Mediterranean cultures. And if they can somehow combine those within their own culture, then they can start to experience more energy, better sleep, on top of everything else that's been, analyzed with testing to make sure that a lot of these imbalances are addressed. So I really try to make it as simple as possible. And by the way, Reed, I do tell my patients, it's not about perfection. It's not about being robotic. I enjoy my red wine here and there. I enjoy my goodies here and there. But it's really about doing it a good 80% of your daily life that you will benefit from that lifestyle and choice. Reed, thank you so much. I really appreciate
It's
it.
been a real pleasure. What I'll give you some things to put in your show notes that you could. We'll give something to your listeners if they want to track us down. They will give them a free book or something like that. And of course, thank you very much for your book. Look forward to reading that. WTF is wrong with our health? I'll just say it that
No,
way.
I greatly appreciate it. And by the way, if patients or the audience, they want to get in touch with you, where can they reach you? And we'll put some notes that they could
Okay,
link
yeah, put
below.
that. So let's do FDN. You see my shirt here? FDNtraining.com, FDNtraining.com/Roberto. And that will get them to a place where they can pick up a free gift and learn more if they want to about some of our program. But if they have some health problems, I would hope that they would make an appointment with you, and that one day we might collaborate and have some of our practitioners working out of your office. They would love the opportunity to work with you and learn from you. And there's plenty of them in California. There's
Yeah.
hundreds of my students who are there, and they might be working independently, or they might have jobs. Hopefully, they're not baristas or something, but they are supposed to be working in doctors' offices, helping, working together. We talked about if you need medicine, get medicine, but that's not all you need. So we're the other backyard that people get to play in. So let's do fdntraining.com/Roberto, and they can get something more information and knowledge.